Good evening, dandies. Welcome to Undetermined, the podcast.
If I'm really tired, it'll come out of me. You'll hear a little bit of a drawl. And then when I lived briefly in Texas, I started picking up y'all.
I say that all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Here in Missouri, Matt, it's Yuns.
Right, or Yuns all.
It's Yuns all.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's the first time I heard that one.
Yuns all.
Yuns all.
Well, it's funny. It traces back to the Civil War era. We didn't know if we want to be the North or the South here in Missouri. So Yuns is Yankee talk and y'all is Confederacy Southern talk. So we just mix it all up.
I got family history on both sides of that. Yeah.
There you go.
A little bit more of the Southern side, probably.
Okay. Yeah. So you're a y'all guy.
Yeah.
You're a y'all guy.
Nothing wrong with that.
I guess Southern Illinois family, and it's Yuns there. Yeah.
So remind me, our topic of this discussion this evening is going to be UFOs, correct?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah, I think so.
That and other things. I mean, we kind of, play it by ear generally, but Tom's always got some interesting stuff to talk about.
Oh, nice.
A lot of pressure on you there, Tom.
Nice.
Oh, I can talk all night if you want.
No, you always I get wrapped up in some of the theories that you bring up and talk about. You're so good at describing them and making them palatable, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely.
I try.
No, you really, it's an art. It's a hard thing to do, to be able to take that and frame it in a way that people can hear it and go, oh, wait, okay, yeah, I can see that now.
Well, I try to do that, and I just keep trying.
Nice.
Well, you're getting pretty good at it, and I appreciate you for it. That's why we want to keep talking to you.
Thank you.
Not the only reason. But we thought it would be an interesting combo. Crockett's mentioned, I think being a former military FBI guy, people ask him about that stuff.
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us, what do you know about UFOs? Are they real? Have you read the secret files? Have you investigated the same? It depends on who's asking me as to what answer I give, just to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, Crockett, you're from the government, therefore you know everything about UFOs.
Exactly.
that is so true, so they think. And depending on who asks me, I ham it up sometimes, and then sometimes I'll downplay it. But the fact of the matter is I really don't know anything other than what comes on CNN or Fox or
right.
Or talking to well-informed people like you, Tom.
Okay. Well, be careful with CNN and Fox.
Yeah,
be careful there.
I know there's fake news abound on all those channels.
Well, the problem is the journalists don't really know much about it, so they don't really know what questions to ask.
That's fair.
Yeah. Well, and Matt sent me this article. What was it? I think it was from October 24th from The Hill about NASA opening their investigation into UAPs and how they're going to basically work on bridging the gap between just reports from common folks through government files, through everything else to research as many of these sightings, everything they can. What'd they say, Matt? They had like 400 to go through, something like that.
I'm sure there's a ton.
Cases that they're starting on anyway.
But some pretty smart people involved, it sounded like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, it was just interesting to hear the way that they're kind of putting together, like, hey, we're just trying to put together the pieces and how we can get everybody involved in this and saying, there's something there. There's something to investigate. And we don't know what it is, which is still amazing to me that that's happened. And, Central Intelligence is doing the same thing. But I guess even not knowing anything about UFOs, just having Crockett on to kind of help us just how this works from the bottom up. Just, an investigation in general, I guess.
Yeah.
Sure.
And just how we could facilitate that instead of like people being at loggerheads over this side of thing. Does it make sense?
It does. It does. From my perspective, it does. And I think that I could add some context to, how the Bureau used to put on investigations. And I can tell you that unidentified flying object type inquiries would certainly go through a special Bureau, all within the FBI, but individuals that have special skill set to understand maybe some of the scientific background as to what the phenomena that people may be describing in the investigation, what may have been a source cause of that other than UFO. Okay, so the agents that come to the Bureau that have a scientific background would probably, if they displayed interest, would, fall into that special investigative bureau for that type of inquiry.
Or would that be like a sort of person they would be more likely to recruit?
It could be. It could be, especially if it's of emphasis. So if it's an issue that is now of emphasis for FBI investigation, they would recruit. Especially if they could see that was going to be an emphasis area for years to come.
Right.
Like for instance, back in the 90s, they had those savings and loan scandal type frauds taking place all over. And so there was a big push to get white collar crime agents. And I came in under that special agent white collar crimes.
Right. With the old Enron thing.
Indeed. And so even before Enron, the precursor to that type of investigation, Ponzi schemes and things of that sort was the savings and loan scandals that hit Texas pretty hard back in the late 80s, early 2000s. So I was a part of the emphasis group for white collar crime agents.
Yeah.
Lots of MBAs were hired at that point in time.
Right. So UFOs, not your thing, not your department. Just to make that clear for everybody.
Yeah, it's not my primary forte.
Right.
If there's any discussion around how they would facilitate an investigation, standing up and just the documentation of an investigation and how inquiry would come in, I could probably lend some conversation to that. But the detail, the science for sure. Yeah, the science for sure not.
I want to make sure everybody knows too, this is also a NASA investigation and not an FBI investigation. So I don't know how much those things are going to vary.
Well, see, I would think NASA would be all about the science and trying to explain why it couldn't have been an unidentified phenomena, moreover than, a UFO.
Looking for a criminal act.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the latest, Tom, on what's new that you're looking into?
Well, on the subject of the NASA inquiry, there's a history there because in the late 70s, President Carter approached NASA to see if they would conduct a UFO investigation. And President Carter had a UFO sighting, and he was very interested in pursuing the subject. And NASA really begged off. They pulled off the bureaucratic stonewall in that case, and they didn't want to have anything to do with it. Now the conditions are different because Chris Mellon and Luis Elizondo and a couple of other F-18 pilots that have seen things during drills have made some headway with Congress, and Congress is starting to, particularly the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, is insisting that the government, that the DoD, cough up more information about UFOs and make more of an effort to investigate it. So this, I think, Mr. Nelson, who is the head of NASA right now, he's expressed some positive thoughts about a UFO investigation. So they have put this group together. Now, John Greenwald of the Black Vault, he's a person that is, since he was 15 years old, has been filing FOIA requests, and he has something like 3 million documents on his website, the Black Vault.
Holy cow.
theblackvault.com. It's not all UFOs, but it's a lot of it is. But he made some comments the other day that the problem with the NASA committee or the NASA team is that most of them are astrophysicists. Okay. So we, as UFO people, we suspect that these craft are coming from outer space. I mean, we tend to think that they're extraterrestrial. But the problem is the sightings occur mostly in the atmosphere and even underwater.
Mm-hmm.
So astrophysicists are gathering data on radio signals from distant stars and nebula and galaxies forming and that kind of thing. So that's a completely different milieu than where UFOs are sighted and supposedly operate. So that could slant and bias their point of view in that, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because kind of last time we talked about what was going on with some of those videos, like, Gimbal and Go Fast and, those things coming out of military training. Was it Fravor?
Yes.
Talking about those. Yeah. And it's interesting how you said it's from the perspective, and we had to, differentiate that this is the Navy versus what the Army would do versus what, the Air Force would do, certainly. So it's all about how these scientists are looking at it from their perspectives. And when it's an unidentified phenomenon like that, it's like, there's no real one perspective to look at it from. But yeah, I wonder why the Air Force really isn't getting as involved.
Well, now talk about history.
Yeah.
Right.
The Air Force has a history with UFOs going back to 1947, if not before.
Yeah, Blue Book was Air Force, wasn't it? Yeah.
And the Air Force did release a couple of things. They released a report called Blue Book Special Report Number 14, and it was a summary of the data that they had collected on sightings up to that point. And then in the late 60s, early 70s, the Air Force got out of the UFO business when the Condon Committee did their study. And then in the 70s, the Blue Book files, at least the ones that the Air Force didn't keep for their own special files, they released all the Blue Book files. So they did do that. We have to give them credit for that. But up to this point, they have been absolutely a stonewall when it comes to any public discussion of UFOs. And in the 80s, the Roswell case began to get legs. And by the early 90s, Congressman Schiff of New Mexico requested an investigation, and the General Accounting Office actually undertook it. But at the same time, on the Air Force side, the gentleman who was in a position to do something about it, his name is Colonel Richard Weaver. He jumped on the subject to get ahead of it, and they conducted an investigation into whatever documentation they could find about Roswell, and they produced this phone book sized book of all the information they collected. Of course, none of that had anything to do with a flying saucer. It was they gave the impression that the cause of the Roswell incident was a mogul balloon. And then a couple of years later, that came out in the early 90s. And then a couple of years later, his subordinate came out with a book called Roswell Case Closed. And the examples that they used in that report were so absurd, I don't think even the press believed it.
Yeah.
So even since then, the Air Force is absolutely silent about anything to do with the UFOs. They don't want to have anything to do with this current development of more public investigations and reporting. And we'll just have to see what happens there.
Yeah. Crockett, who do you know at the Air Force?
No, well, I'm wondering, how does Space Command factor into the whole
the Space Force?
Yeah, the Space Force
branch.
investigates UFOs.
Well, this public person that's taken a very public profile, Luis Elizondo, he resigned from the Pentagon because he wasn't happy with not being able to go high enough to get the higher ups to pay attention to the UFO problem. So he resigned, and he got associated with TTSA, and then he quit that. And he's been giving a lot of interviews, but now he's actually a contractor for the Space Force.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know if that has
Wow.
anything to do with UFOs or not, but
Huh.
I know that he's doing that. Now,
Interesting.
there have been reports of astronauts seeing unidentified objects in orbit around the Earth. When they're doing their orbiting thing, and we have. I mean, it's kind of an assumption in the UFO field, but that the NORAD and the all of the defense mechanisms that we have, the satellites, the electronic capabilities that we have to track things, that we kind of assume that the government doesn't miss anything coming in or out of the atmosphere.
Right.
And I can't prove that, but that's a strong suspicion that we have. And I would think that the Space Force at least would have the technological capability to track some of this, on their part of it. But the Space Force, the Defense Department and the military and the Air Force and the Navy, they all have a job to do in their military field. Okay. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them take the attitude, we don't want to be involved with UFOs. That's not our job.
Right. Yeah. Just more work. Right.
Well, I think there's also like a credibility issue. Like if you're kind of in a position where you have to really look credible.
Yeah.
It's scary to put yourself out there. And that's kind of why I take like the Jimmy Carters and the Harry Reids a little bit more seriously than some of the other people, because these are people that have a lot to lose by putting it out there that they have seen something and they believe in it.
Absolutely.
They have data, okay? And we suspect that they have reams and reams and reams of data. Some of it may be, stored away and not paid attention to, but we believe that an awful lot of data is there. So, that's part of the story, and that's a situation.
I wonder how much of spying takes place with various types of equipment is attributed to UFO sightings.
I was wondering.
Yeah.
Like not necessarily spying specifically, but just like how much stuff that, we don't know about that's actually floating around in space that somebody that they aren't going to tell us about.
Yeah.
Right. So an astronaut could see something like that and not know what it is because it's off the records.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the problem with getting any information to the public is that the DOD, the intelligence and the military branches, they don't want our adversaries to know how they got that data. They don't want them to know what technology was used, what the capabilities of the technology was.
Yeah, no, I can ratify that is very much the case. And we think that the government may be coy about actual UFO sightings, but in fact, they may know exactly what that sighting was about. And it may have been a spycraft effort, moreover, than an extraterrestrial type of.
I mean, that's kind of what. I mean, I read an article in Reuters just from a couple of days ago, and I think it was what they're starting to release on preliminaries for like CIA investigations into UFOs. And they said the top ones on the list that we can check off, they said there have been some surveillance. And they said that, some instances, Chinese drones, this or that. Of course, the Chinese have said, yeah, we don't have those. Not like that.
That's very, very telling.
Yeah. But they said one of the things that was interesting about that article was that they said the ones that become, harder to solve, the ones that they have no data on, really. When it's, because a report can be filed and there can just be. And Tom and Matt and I talked about this before, where so many of those things, like when you were a field investigator, Tom, you just had to go to somebody talking about something that happened in the sky over there 2 weeks ago. And there's nothing there now,
Yeah, I've made that point that generally all the investigator has to work with is the testimony of the witness.
Right.
It's very rare that there's any physical evidence involved, even though the investigator can take measurements and triangulate things and try to figure out what angle it was seen at and all that. But that doesn't tell you what you want to know.
Right.
You want to know, what is it? Where did it come from? Why is it here? What are they up to?
Right.
That's what you really want to know.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Tom, do you mind me asking who you were an investigator for?
I was with MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, and I started out in the early 90s, and I was a state section director for a while, and I did have the field investigator's card. I passed the field investigator exam, but I also served on the MUFON board really up until this year. I'm no longer on the MUFON board, but I've been actively involved in the UFO field since about 1990.
Okay. No, thank you for that background.
Yeah, we should have swapped resumes.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. My background's not nearly as impressive as Crockett's.
I think Crockett, he's done his own investigating. Definitely.
Yeah, but I know nothing about UFOs.
But you do know about investigating, and I think that's kind of an important element in all of this.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. And I tell you, moreover than that, just intelligence. I just keep coming back to the whole intelligence notion that maybe we might be attributing some of this phenomena to just China and Russia and maybe North Korea's, abilities to put something in the atmosphere that can spy on our citizens that we call a UFO.
Part of the strategy, I think, of the DoD to get this off their backs is to say, oh, they're drones, or maybe they're spy drones or something. But if you talk to the actual F-18 pilot, I haven't talked to them personally, but if you listen to what the F-18 pilots in the Navy say, they know darn good and well they're not drones because of the capabilities that the objects exhibited.
Yeah, I think one of the things, too, that really kind of stuck wrong with me was in this CIA report was explaining, I think it was the GoFest video, saying that they thought it was an optical illusion against the angle that it was shot towards the water that made it appear to go so fast. And I was like, no, these guys had this locked on radar. They could have, they were detecting the speed without, regardless of what it looked like on the scope. And it was just astronomical speeds or where it was, it didn't just look like it was going quick. As a matter of fact, the video quality is just terrible. But the actual data they got on it from radar was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tom, tell me, if we are comfortable with believing that UFOs do exist and that they are within our atmosphere, would you think that the beings that were driving the spacecraft or the vehicle that we cite as UFO would they have citizens or extraterrestrials moving around amongst us, like mutants, if you will?
Well, some people think that is the case. Since the abduction phenomenon really started to bloom in the 1980s, there were all kinds of stories from alleged abductees that sperm was being taken from men and women were impregnated.
Right.
And then later the fetus was taken, and they were, at a later time, they were shown this very strange looking baby with wispy hair, and they were asked to cuddle it, and touch it and give it some kind of human contact. And there's been some sentiment. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just reporting what people have been saying, is that gradually they've developed these hybrids to the point that they're virtually indistinguishable from normal humans, and that there are some of them walking around. Now, I don't know if that's the case or not, but that has been talk over many years.
Almost like a mutant.
Just a hybrid.
Wow. Just a hybrid. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. John, I remember we've told this joke before, John's theory on the Bratz dolls.
Yeah, I remember those in the 90s, the girls with the great big eyes. and the giant heads, and they were like Barbies in toys, but they were called brats. I was like, that's what they're doing. They're slowly exposing us to what these hybrids are going to look like. And we won't be shocked when we see them.
Right.
It's like exposure.
Well, there was a time in the 1990s when a lot of this was really getting a lot of public attention, but you go into a store, like a department store, and you'd have all kinds of alien T-shirts and Roswell T-shirts and all this kind of thing.
Yeah, and the image of the green-headed gray alien with the big eyes just became a pop culture thing all over the world. Yeah, it's kind of crazy how it kind of broke out around them.
That's all interesting. Do you feel like if in fact there are beings amongst us, do you think that they're friendlies, or do you think that they're meaning to do us harm, somehow wanting to overthrow or take over? What do you think their intent is?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, because if what we think, and I'm talking about the UFO community, if what we think is really happening, there are several groups involved, because everyone's familiar with the little gray aliens, with the big bug eyes and all that. But other kinds of entities have been reported. For example, what we call Nordics, which are human-looking entities with long blonde hair and all that. And then there are very strange-looking creatures that are mantis-like, that remind you of a praying mantis. And then there also have been reptilians reported. So it's just, I think that it's possible that one or more groups are at least neutral, if not friendly, and that it's possible there are other groups that are not friendly. And if the deep, dark, secret government knows what we think they might know, that could be something of great concern to them, and why they don't make this public. Because if they think that there are one or more groups out there that are not friendly, that would cause a big problem if the public knew about that.
A lot of fear.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, because it could be, as you described it, it could be a different races amongst the alien community, much like there's different races and ethnicities here
Species,
on Earth.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what the difference is. Different ethnicities and races within the alien community.
Well, if they're coming from different places, I mean, they're probably going to have very different cultures and ideas, a lot like here. I was kind of hearing in my head when we were talking about all the different potential guests that we have. Like, it almost sounds like, back in the 1600s, and Europe has discovered this whole new world on the other side of the ocean, right? And they're all just kind of planting their flags everywhere over here. And it's almost kind of the same way, they kind of all have kind of discovered this place, and they're all kind of feeling it out and trying to stake their claims here and there. Who knows?
Yeah.
And just imagine if it's a situation where it's an inbreeding hybrid type of scenario, and they're just trying it out amongst all living things, and planting sperm within all living things to see what species comes out the best, that best serves their intentions. It's an interesting concept to think about.
It is.
I think we could put a movie together, fellas, and
I think
it would be a box office bestseller. What do you think? It'd be a hit.
Okay, you guys can get all the royalties.
You know what your name on?
Thank you. You heard it. Matt, make sure this is recording. You heard it.
Just keep my name.
Right.
Just keep my name off that script.
Well, I've made that analogy about the New World, because if you were Native Americans, it would have been very confusing, because some of the people coming over would have been white, and they would have had dark hair. And then some of the people coming over would have been white, and they would have had red hair, and some other would have blonde hair. And then you would have blacks coming in, into the New World. So I believe when the Aztecs, the Mexica, when they first saw the Spanish coming in on their horses, they thought it was all one creature.
Yeah.
Okay?
I've heard that.
It took them a while to figure out that they were they were actually two different creatures.
Hmm.
And our situation is very confusing too. We're just trying to figure out what's going on, and it's rather complicated and pretty confusing.
Yeah, and I think a lot when we go into things like motive, what are they here for? What are they doing? We kind of anthropomorphize that a lot. We make that very human.
Sure.
We base it on things like human desires and interests. We base it on human accomplishments and things that we've done from the past, and what denotes things like civilization. Another planet could have evolved in a totally different way with a totally different species of people that have even thoughts or concepts that we don't even consider because they're like not within our biological range or not within our environment.
Comprehension, just our comprehension.
But I think just figuring out what the hell is going on first is, before we get into that.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to take steps in the right direction with that. I don't know.
It's interesting, and that's great commentary. And to feed into that, it's interesting that whenever we think about UFOs, they're always more advanced than us,
Right?
As far as their ability, and why is that? Why is it that we always make that assumption, or the implication is that they're all more advanced than how we are?
Well, they got here.
That's the big one. But yeah, they could have totally different motives.
We got the moon. We got to the moon. We got to Mars. We got to the moon.
And you never know. They may have not developed something like, when like sci-fi writers, things have done this before. They may have not conceptualized things like art before. Or, I don't know. They might just find something interesting about us.
Right. Or they could have skipped ahead. I think here, what's the story? I'm assuming it's true. Like the match was invented after the lighter, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Maybe they just kind of stumbled across something that really got them a long way.
Yeah. Maybe it's Taco Bell. Who knows?
I would say McDonald's more than Taco Bell.
Yeah.
Well, and you can't think like an alien does because by definition they're alien.
Exactly.
So there's no way that we can think like them and think about what their agenda might be.
Mm-hmm.
It could be something that has nothing to do with anything that we've conceived.
Right.
It just might be space exploration, just like what we do.
Yeah, it might be. Just us, like the way we go out looking for things that we don't understand. But I do think with some of the capabilities we've seen of things like flight speeds and just what people have observed, there's definitely some technological advances in some areas.
Right.
They're making headway there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just figuring out what they are first is pretty much important.
What's scary to me is thinking if, in fact, their technology is far more advanced as far as aeronautical. Mm-hmm. What about their weaponry?
Right.
If in fact they've even thought far enough along, you almost have to have a natural aggressor or enemy to then conceive forming weapons against them. Uh-huh. So maybe their advancement has not gotten them that far, because they have no enemies.
Right. Or in a different path, like when the Chinese basically developed gunpowder and just hadn't made projectile weapons for many years out of it.
What do they say? Necessity is the mother of all creation. So if there hasn't been a necessity to form weapons to fight off an aggressor, maybe that hasn't happened yet.
Uh-huh.
Because our technology hadn't advanced far enough to be an aggressor. I mean, we're not on their home planet. You guys have made me channel some thoughts that I haven't fully developed, and that's pretty good.
I'm gonna have to call some old buddies, right? Some people.
Yeah. See what we can check out.
What do you know?
What do you know about MUFON? Tell me everything you know.
But I think kind of touching on that, what I was just thinking about was how, unfortunately, one of the positive side effects of living in an aggressive culture, that we do as humans, is that, boy, the science that they use to develop some of the shit that they like, think of all the things that came out of like developing the bomb, right? The whole Manhattan Project, all that stuff. And, boy, some really awful things came out of it. But man, did we learn a lot about things that have really kind of advanced us too. Just learning about physics in general.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've made tremendous scientific and technological progress in the last 300 or 400 years. But what if the other side is 1,000 years ahead or 1,000,000 years ahead?
Right.
What if we keep on the same track, what will we be capable of 1,000 years from now?
Well, just think of how much is developed in our lifetimes, right? Technology is way beyond what it was when we were kids. And just how fast and big that evolution was in just half a lifetime.
Right.
Imagine what, like, centuries.
One of the things that impresses me the most, and I'm not a scientist or a mathematician or anything, but we take it for granted on our cell phones that we have GPS right down to the corner of the street.
Uh-huh.
And we just put in where we want to go, and it tells us where to go and where to turn and all that. And that's to me, that's just a marvelous development.
Yeah.
And probably the military had those capabilities 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah, it is weird. I was looking at my phone with the GPS the other day, and just with my schmaverage Android phone, read the specs on the GPS that it was within 6 feet accuracy. 6 feet.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, wow. I just have a drone bring me anything right there, or somebody could target me, and easily hit me.
Right.
With this little thing. Just so amazing that that's happened. Gosh, in our lifetime,
Yeah.
Or that they figured out, going back to the GPS, just like the way that it works, like they had to figure out that the satellites work in like literally different time. Like there's a minuscule fraction of a second, right? That it's off, but it moves. I can't remember which one moves slightly faster and which one's slightly slower. But they had to figure that out just to make GPS work.
Yeah.
And what does that show us? It means we know a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But we're also just, touching on the surface. That means we can figure out, okay, time travel is kind of possible. It happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is this is one of the biggest things that's led to a lot of time travel theory is due to all the advances we make technologically. Just thinking of ourselves in the future, how exponential it's been. Why wouldn't that be a possibility 300 years now? Maybe that's us visiting. Or there's another theory that we have gotten a bunch of technology off of UAP wrecks as well. So,
yeah, those are the rumors. Those are the legends. But there's also the notion that they've, if they've had one or more saucers that they've been studying secretly, that they've made no progress.
Yeah, that's true.
It's so far ahead of where we're at that they haven't been able to get anywhere. So there are two sides to that, but we suspect that, at least in the UFO field, we suspect that at least some of that has been gleaned. Because what they can do is they can turn it over to a private company and let their best geniuses work at it.
Sure.
I mean, there have been rumors since Philip Corso came out with his book that fiber optics may have come from that whole sequence of events from Roswell, because they noticed in the craft that there were these wires that were illuminated, and they were actually fiber optic type wires.
Well, the development of fiber optics seemed to just come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have to look into the history of that, though.
Seeing this whole time, I thought it was Verizon.
Right. Just shit tons of money, right? Could be.
AT&T.
That's part of it, too. Yeah. Good funding. It's going to be interesting to see, though. I'm interested to see what they come out with and what they say in these investigations.
Well, I tell you what, when I take it back to potentially mutants walking amongst us, I think about certain individuals that have really catapulted technology and development to a whole new level through, within respective companies, like Apple, like Tesla, SpaceX, and I marvel at how these companies have moved so far along so fast seemingly without even government involvement, along the spectrum of invention. How does that happen? Is it that they, individuals within the organization have more enlightenment because of their, terrestrial state than just a mere human?
So you're saying Elon Musk could be an alien?
It would make sense. I wouldn't question that a whole lot if that came out.
I mean, I didn't come out and say it just as plain as that. But what if there is something to individuals that have seemingly superhuman qualities that are head and shoulders above the mere smart mortal? What if that were the case?
Well, a person by the name of Richard Doty is a very controversial character, but he has been giving a lot of interviews. And in one of the interviews, he made the claim that the Air Force found out that one of their younger officers, and I think it was in Europe, but he had a roommate or something like that, another Air Force person. And this guy never slept. He never went to sleep. And they found out he was going out on a hill and sitting on a hill, and I guess maybe communicating with whoever.
Wow.
And they realized this guy was some kind of a hybrid or a mutant. Now that's a claim, but I thought it was a pretty interesting story. I can give you guys a reference on that if you want to know.
Yeah.
That is very interesting, and it kind of fits into what I was insinuating. Of course, I didn't have the book and the research to ground my thoughts. It was just a thought that I had. Now, Matt can attest to this. I mean, when I was playing in high school football, I was probably viewed as a bit of a mutant because of my skills on the field. Light years above the rest. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah. We know why the FBI wanted you. We're going to get one of those guys on our team.
It was that skill crap that I had on the football field, right?
Exactly. So thinking about that, like just in your time in government, were you ever privy, and I won't ask you to like give details, but to like really advanced technology that most people didn't know about?
I was really privy to individuals that displayed advanced knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, knowledge for a young person that would just blow you away. And how would you put it, just without beating around the bush, just individuals who would graduate from Harvard in 3 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
2.5 years, and got all A's. And then they decided to be, government agents. Why? Why?
Right. So the investigator in you is going, what's up with this?
And there are those individuals out there, and it's amazing to me to see how our government can attract, in some fields, the best and brightest. And everybody would bring their own special thing to the force.
Mm-hmm.
When I was with the FBI, it was like, this person was literally a math genius. This person was an electrical engineer. It was almost like a version of the A-team. Everybody had their own special skill.
All right, cool.
And when you put it together, it makes a powerful team.
Right.
I'm still trying to figure out what my skill was in all of it. But anyway, and looking at these other people, it almost seemed like, it was like the Avengers. Everybody came with their own superhuman powers.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that we should hang our hat on with our government, is that they do, for whatever reason, attract pretty bright individuals, irrespective of the money that they pay.
Yeah.
They still attract, I wouldn't say the best and the brightest, but they certainly do have individuals that are remarkable in their own right, just from their accomplishments and then what they are endeavoring to do through the agency, within the agency.
Sure.
Interesting.
Sure. Matt, do you know any aliens? Did you grow up with anybody in particular?
Possibly. We're probably thinking of the same person.
We are.
Stop it, guys. I'm really not an alien. Stop it. Stop it.
Yeah. I might even know.
Freak, hey, maybe I'm a freak, maybe, but not an alien. Freak of nature. Huh?
Yeah, he went out.
The reason kind of that question came into my head was I remember, and this was kind of an interesting experience that I had.
Mhm.
Of all things, I went to a play at Drury because I was a theater major there. This was after I graduated and just went back to see a show. And they did like this production. It was kind of interesting it was like a hypothetical like conversation between these two peers who were like physicists in like real life one. But this is like the Cold War. They kind of ended up on either side, when like Hitler was recruiting people or was stealing basically the smart scientists.
Okay.
And then the other countries were. So this is like two friends that kind of got together and had a conversation and kind of talked about what it was like on the other side. It was a really interesting play. I think it was Niels Bohr, and I can't think of it. Anyway, one of the guys that came afterwards, was this like crazy looking old dude. And afterwards he was like, yeah, I'm a physicist. And he's talking like he studied under one of these guys, like really, and that was the whole reason he came.
Mandela or something like that. Mandela.
No, I think it was Niels Bohr. But he had studied under him, and he was like very cantankerous. Like after he just was holding court, and he was fascinating to listen to. But he's like, I'm old. I don't give a shit anymore. They can do what they're going to do. I'm on every no-fly list there is, because I set off every alarm every time I go anywhere. He's like, I've forgotten more about physics than your physics professor here, I guarantee you. Yeah, and I was like, wow. But he would talk about, he's like, I've been in caves inside mountains where they had plasma screens in the 60s, and he's just telling all this shit. And I'm just like, I don't know if he's absolutely crazy or if he just doesn't care anymore and he's just letting it out. Either way, I'm glued.
I'd be like, if he was really letting it out, why would he choose to come to Drury at a play?
Well, the play is because the play was about his mentor.
Oh, okay.
I think you're referring to a play called Copenhagen.
Yeah. That's it.
From looking it up. Yep, by Michael Frayn, based on an event that occurred in Copenhagen in 1941. Meeting between Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg.
Yeah, Heisenberg. Yeah.
Okay. Did you Google that man, or how did you Google it?
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
That makes us all smart.
I was thinking to myself, if you just came up with that off the top of your head, you're an alien.
No, I
You're an
Googled
alien.
Niels
And I'm getting
Bohr
off this call.
Yeah.
He had retired in Willow Springs, Missouri.
Oh,
You're kidding.
Huh. I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Well, Crockett, if you want to have superpowers, I can refer you to several people.
Nice.
Cool.
I want in on this too. Wait a second.
I wouldn't mind having some superpowers, because I think superpowers could be parlayed into wealth. What do you think?
Well, I mean, for me, at least, maybe I could understand the limits of functions.
Right.
Yeah.
A perfect movie to me that illustrates this point, and of course it was a guy that was taking a pill that gave him this unlimited power, and that was the name of the movie, Unlimited, starring Bradley Cooper.
Oh, I remember that one. Yeah, it's a good one.
And he took a pill, and then the pill allowed him just to absorb anything that he was exposed to. So he would open up books and just basically fan the pages of the books, and he would pick up the knowledge that was within him. He didn't have to sleep. He didn't have to per se eat. He was just a sponge for every bit of knowledge that came his way every day. Just imagine if you could take a pill, or if that type of thing existed, and that's what the aliens, back to our topical discussion, that's what the aliens are doing with us, exposing themselves to us to glean all of our knowledge.
That's a possibility. Yeah.
Yeah.
They only have to they only can gain knowledge if they're exposed to it.
Right.
They're not learned on their own. They have to be exposed.
Or maybe just how we don't understand how they think, right? Or any other organism thinks. Really, we can only come at things from our own perspective.
Right.
Maybe spending some time here helps them to be able to broaden their horizons?
Assimilate and then just glean the knowledge that we have, even if it is maybe more antiquated than their technology. There's probably components of our knowledge that they just don't have, because they had never been exposed.
Yeah, I suppose it's got to be resource driven, some kind, whether that's something we make, something we, or something that our planet makes, or
I don't know.
Again, are we putting human qualities on them? Maybe they don't need anything.
Exactly. It might just be just that, John.
Yeah.
We have human qualities. They haven't got that because it's just a different species. And so they're trying to learn a species.
Seems to really lead to some bad places, though. I don't know why you'd want any of it.
Well, we know that some of these people are working on computer-brain interfaces.
Mm-hmm.
And you take the whole internet, and if you have a brain interface to it, how would that affect human behavior when you can just download reams and reams of information about things?
Yeah.
I read one scientist's take on that I thought was really interesting, and it was an economical take, and he said it's going to create, if that does happen and that does work, it's going to create such class division, because it's definitely going to be a wealthy thing. Maybe not an extremely wealthy thing to do. Maybe people will be able to afford cheaper models, say in the U.S., but in countries that are devastated by poverty, I don't think they're going to get access to like a neural link like that. I wonder if Elon's still working on his.
He's probably got it hooked to Twitter right now.
Twirler.
But I was also thinking about how, we've talked about here as we develop, what's the most important thing that we are searching for? What's the biggest commodity we have right now is information, right? So who's to say that more advanced civilizations can't find some value in information from here that we are unaware of how it is going to benefit them?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
That makes a perfectly good sense. Like here we are discounting something as innocuous as a rock, but in their civilization and their technology, that thing could mean more than it means here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it could be that we have certain minerals and elements that they need.
Yeah,
maybe they're extracting them.
I think about that, but for me, what makes that one hard to digest, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think just about any resource that you would want out there, any physical resource in terms of mineral or gas or anything like that, it's a big universe. If you can get here, you can find a place that isn't, basically infested with pests.
Yeah. Well, unless there's something to do with life forms or organic life that they need, because we found out that's pretty rare.
Yeah. Or maybe it was just from something from, prehistoric. That it only exists here because we only possess the species that evolved to the resource that they need, like fossil fuel.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, maybe.
The need to do what? That is the question, I guess, for all species. But yeah, man, I don't know.
One would assume that if their technology is more advanced, then they would have had more exposure and resources to create that technological advance than we would have. Mm-hmm. Because I would like to believe that there's enough smart people on this earth that would make best use of the resources that we have available to us to extract and to create the best that resource could possibly produce.
Yeah, I think we need a whole lot of work on that on this planet.
Yeah, maybe I'm a little bit naive in this regard, but
I don't know. Maybe we give them their own version of the Kopi Luwak coffee or whatever.
Kopi Luwak. Kopi Luwak.
It's Taco Bell.
The cat dung coffee.
It's the chips and cheese.
Yeah, they saw Taco Bell and turned around and went the other way.
Oh, next exit, man.
Oh, man.
They went to Taco Bell and started working there, man.
This episode of Undetermined has been brought to you by Taco Bell.
No, actually, I like their Mexican pizza.
I do too. I like their cheesy gordita crunch. The Baja Blast Mountain Dew is wonderful. Check it out. Go to your local Taco Bell.
Endorsement.
Mention John and
Hey,
Matt.
great save.
There you
Save.
go.
Thank you. Pulling us up.
I always got tickled, and this is getting way off subject, but the Taco Bell down the street from me, they tore it down and built a new one. But the old one, before they tore it down, when you went, you know how like you go through the drive-through and they used to have the little thing on there that said store number? I swear to God, this was Taco Bell number 420. And all I could think was like, well, that is the most perfect number for a Taco Bell ever.
Right.
And I felt like I had a special one in my neighbor because of that. Should be like the stoner mecca.
Right.
Oh, jeez.
Jeez. Oh,
Tom, how can you bring us home on this whole entire thing? Give us the moral of the story, please.
Okay, well, I would like to mention that my area of interest is the MJ-12 affair.
Yeah.
Without really going into a lot of detail about that, one of the things that was going on was at Kirtland Air Force Base in the 1980s, a man that lived next to the base, his name was Paul Benowitz, and he was collecting data from what he was seeing on Kirtland Air Force Base. And he was collecting some magnetic data, and he was filming and photographing things that he saw going on there. And he approached the Air Force people on Kirtland Air Force Base. And they actually had a pretty...
Hello?
I guess I was on mute and I didn't realize it.
They're easy to bump sometimes.
They are.
He censored himself.
Or, are you being monitored? Tap the mic twice if you need help.
You know, right.
Oh, good.
Anyway, what I was saying was that what I'm interested in is the history of the MJ-12 affair. And part of that was this person by the name of Paul Benowitz, who lived next to Kirtland Air Force Base. I've actually visited exactly where he lived. But he was collecting data, magnetic data, and he was taking photographs and making films of what he was seeing going on in the Manzano Mountains sector of Kirtland Air Force Base. And he approached the base and talked to, they actually had a meeting with a lot of people in there, some high level. Some of them walked out when they realized that he was goofy, but they decided to undertake a counterintelligence program. And this involved not only the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, but also the National Security Agency, and I believe that the FBI may have been involved as well. The point being that Paul Benowitz, was being monitored. In fact, across the street from where he lived, they found out that there were NSA people tracking, his communications, and it's possible that he may have been picking up on things that the NSA was doing, and they didn't want that to leak into, our adversaries, namely the Soviet Union. It's kind of a complicated case because it's possible that one of his employees, he had a business called Thunder Scientific Labs, and that it's possible one of his employees was spotted at the Soviet embassy in Mexico City. So good. There were a lot of things going on, but this is where, and one of the things that really intrigues me is the counterintelligence work that goes on, sometimes with AFOSI, because they have to, one of their purposes is to, ordinarily the AFOSI just handles ordinary type crimes on Air Force bases and things. But there is a function of deconfliction. If someone comes in and says, I saw a UFO, they want to know, did they see a classified aircraft or did they see a UFO? And they'll tell them the opposite. If they saw a UFO, they'll tell them they saw a classified aircraft. And if they saw a classified aircraft, they'll tell them they saw a UFO.
That makes sense.
Kind of a thing. But this is where I'm trying to relate to Crockett here a little bit, being from the FBI, because the FBI certainly has a counterintelligence function.
Sure they do. Yep, they do.
Yeah, I should hope so. Yeah.
And if in fact this is truly a thing of national security, I would expect for them to divert somehow, some way, you know, to discuss that they know that is true could be compromising. So
Yeah.
that's how it works.
Yeah. And when you're taking data on an Air Force base, you're taking data on an Air Force base.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of something that somebody might ask, I don't know, you to say in a certain situation? Or
Who, me?
Crockett, I was trying to elicit any personal experience with that you want to tell us about?
It's funny because when I was working on the Enron investigation, I had all types of queries about certain fraud schemes. And then, when I went to work for Shell, my experience within Enron, several people were very interested in understanding exactly what did they do, what was the point of breach of law, as if it was a genius thing until they got caught.
Right, like how can we improve upon this plan?
Indeed. Tell us how they got caught, or tell us the specific piece of what they were doing that would constitute a fraud scheme.
That's creepy.
Right. My natural response was, well, the whole damn thing. It was a breach of the law from the onset.
It was a bad idea to start.
It was a breach from the onset. There was no component or element that was good until it was bad. It was all bad.
That's a good response.
Yep.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah. So,
and part of the problem may have been that the Enron guys the top guys were awfully smart, and they had this really complicated, sophisticated looking scheme of how they were hiding money and transferring money and giving the wrong impression about their profitability. And if you're in a room with them, you don't want to ask dumb questions. I mean, people probably didn't want to ask, okay, how does this subsidiary really relate to this offshore entity that you have? And if it's a company culture where you're looked down on and you're just looked down on if you ask a dumb question in a meeting. And I think that went on quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You're exactly right. And everybody wants to be regarded as the smartest guy in the room. But we all know that there only can be one smartest guy in the room.
Right.
And so this whole culture of not wanting to disclose that you're not he is fed into exactly what you said. It's just a toxic culture. But it's funny because, you're sitting back and you're interviewing these guys and you're trying to understand exactly what they were thinking based on that they were seeing. And you would just quickly determine that they knew that it was too good to be true, but yet didn't say anything. And why? Because nobody else did. And the guy that was regarded as the smartest guy in the room said it. He said it to be the case. He has to be the smartest guy in the room, right? If he's the CFO,
he's telling everybody. Yeah.
If he's the head dog, and he's certainly the richest guy in the room, so therefore riches equates to smartest,
right? And I think the older I get, and I think a lot of us fall for it, like somebody we see as smart saying, "Trust me," right? Okay.
Yeah.
And we go right along with it. And to some degree, we have to like function as a society. Like the older I get, the more I realize doctors don't know nearly as much as I have thought that they had my entire life, right? Because they can't diagnose shit, right?
That's why they call it practicing. That's why they practice medicine.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly. And this is not a knock on them at all. I respect it. Absolutely. And I know it's got to be hard to just get to that place. Lots of respect for it. But we have this thing where we can turn people into like almost gods in our brains.
Yeah.
Well, another part of the problem was the accounting firm, Arthur Anderson.
Oh, yeah.
They were making very high fees, both as auditing for auditing the financial statements and in consulting. And they were making so much money that they were looking the other way, probably knowing that Enron was was doing these things.
Mhm.
And people start looking into it, even investors, and they start finding discrepancies. And then one thing leads to another, and then you end up with the whole fraud investigation.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I think that, to dovetail onto that, I think that Arthur Anderson may have even helped them to conceive some of the things in the form of loopholes that they were doing. There's no way that one individual could stand up an infrastructure that would create companies within companies to shoulder debt without there being some nod from their external accounting, their external auditing and accounting firm. There's no way.
Yeah.
Because some of those creations of companies would have had to have been incorporated and stood up by that firm, and then essentially audited by that firm. So who's to say that those guys didn't form the initial plan that set this in motion?
Well, and I think the auditors, the Arthur Anderson and all them, I mean, there's a certain psychology that they don't want to offend the client because they're, the client is paying them.
Sure. Especially one that's giving you a lot of money.
Yeah. And that money is the money that they're giving you is based off of the fraud scheme that they being the auditing firm stood up or facilitated the creation of. So it's a self-licking lollipop.
But, the auditing firm, they don't want to offend the client. So unless they find an obvious discrepancy, an obvious material misstatement, they will have a tendency to not dig, and really drill down deep.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure. I was kind of the question I had, Crockett, maybe you can answer. Did you ask them, like, if they knew, like, it was too good to be true, what made them think it was not going to come crashing down on them?
Yeah.
Well, it hadn't. And, in this, very simply put, it had not for years and years, and money was being paid, and life was still ticking on, and they were still rated the number one firm in the Fortune 500, and so results were informing their opinion that this was legitimate.
Man,
it's like, I know that it's not, because it just seems too good to be true. However, all of these smart people have touched this thing and are making money off this thing. So who am I to say that it's wrong when everybody else is benefiting?
I can't imagine how anybody can live like that and not be like so stressed out.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of it's a criminal mentality, and it's sort of a drug dealer mentality, right? Ain't nothing bad happened yet.
Yeah.
I'm making money.
Ugh. That would cause me too much stress just in itself.
Yeah.
Seriously, I would just be a mess. My life would be awful. I wouldn't care how rich I was. That's a terrible life to sign up for.
Yeah. And then, there was an epiphany. If you think about this thing, there was an epiphany in the end, where the smartest guys knew that it was all come crashing down, and that it was, just a house of cards. Hence why they were apostatizing the company stock all the while they were selling the company stock. It was the pump and dump. And so I think that was the criminal offense. And then the fixings of mail fraud and wire fraud is the bread and butter predicate. But, the intent showing that they knew all the while when they were saying one thing and doing another.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
That's the intent. And fraud schemes are very hard to prove intent. I mean, because intent takes action.
Yeah.
And that was the action. They were selling when all the while they were saying you should buy.
Huh.
So I want to kind of steer us back toward where we were. Like, we'll use the smartest man in the room element. Like, we were talking about people we run into that just are freakishly smart, that it almost seems like they're from another planet. I'm wondering, Tom, do you have any like encounters with people like that?
Well, I've worked with a lot of people that were a whole lot smarter than I was, or am. I can tell a little story about something I read in a book about John von Neumann, and he was a top flight mathematician during the era of the Manhattan Project, and he was also very effective in helping get the first computers started. And he was so smart, he was so brilliant that someone cracked a joke that if you studied him closely, eventually you would come to the conclusion that he was actually human.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. That's a great line.
I like that.
All right, fellas. I'm going to have to wrap pretty soon here. But I had a great time. I don't want to keep you guys on too long either. We've been on about an hour 15 or so.
Okay.
Is there anything anybody wants to like talk about in particular? Like,
yes, projects you're working on, things you want to promote, anything like that. Now's a good time.
Well, I just real quick, and thanks for the discussion, Tom, and obviously Matt and John. It was good. Don't know how much I lent to the discussion on the technical side, but certainly on the special interest side, it felt good to me. And thanks for letting me be a part of it.
Oh, thank you, man.
Absolutely.
Here in WP, we are doing some alien-like things, such as putting big murals on the sides of buildings. Matt, have you been following that?
I haven't been keeping up with stuff. I'm sorry.
Oh, shame on you.
I know.
Some pics, but I'm involved in a new business endeavor that involves a Airbnb and art gallery. So we've got an art gallery that I've also made into an Airbnb.
Oh, where?
I know.
And, it's in downtown West Plains.
Cool.
Number 14 Court Square. And we put a big old mural. I had a friend of mine from Lagos, Nigeria, an artist by the name of Balaji Ogunmu, Dr. Ogunmu, came over and painted a mural on the side of the building.
Cool.
And interestingly enough, this mural was his version of a picture that was drawn in the 1960s by a downtown merchant by the name of Charles Kimberlin II. And so I own this painting, and Balaji put his twist on that painting from a longtime resident of West Plains, Charles Kimberlin II. So it's on the side of 14 Court Square. That's my new business.
Oh, wow.
Endeavor. I'm still over at the university, but this is something else that I'm delving into. So hopefully it will take off and be a source of enjoyment for our citizens here in West Plains.
Awesome. We'll definitely have to check that out.
Yeah. And West Plains could always use more art. Everybody could always use more art.
For sure.
Yeah. Tom?
Yeah, what I do is I write research papers, and I have a blog. It's called tomwhitmoreblog.wordpress.com. And I posted 5 research papers so far, and I'm working on a 6th. One is about counterintelligence, the counterintelligence angle. Another is before MJ-12. Another paper is psychological warfare and strategic deception. I wrote a paper about AFOSI, and another paper about forgeries and frauds throughout history. So I'm working on a 6th paper right now, MJ-12 and continuity of government. So I hope to finish that pretty soon.
Yeah.
It's been dragging on for a long time, but I still have a little bit of reading to do and a little bit more research before I start writing. And every week I post an update of the work that I'm doing, and it shows what I'm reading and what progress I'm making. So I encourage everybody to look at my blog, tomwhitmoreblog.wordpress.com.
Yep. You can follow that. You can find research papers there of history. I've read a few of Tom's. They're really compelling reads. But thank you, fellas, for both for joining us for this kind of round table. It was cool. And I had a great time. Yeah. It's interesting stuff, man.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thank you to both of you. And we'll have you guys on again sometime.
Yeah, we'll see what kind of developments come out here and all these investigations that are going on.
That would be great.
Guys, keep doing what you're doing. Appreciate
All
it.
right. Thanks,
Thanks,
Crockett.
man.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Crockett.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Undetermined the Podcast. Special guest, Tom Whitmore and Crockett Oates. Have a good night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.